Hi, everyone. This is Brad Kramer. You'll be hearing my voice throughout the afternoon on this webinar. I just wanted to open the audio up and let folks know that we still do have a number of people joining. So we're going to stand by for just a couple moments, and I will check back in and get started very shortly. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brad Kramer, for those of you who didn't happen to be on a little bit earlier when I gave the 2-minute warning. I just wanted to take the moment to thank you for taking the time to participate in this webinar. This is actually the 6th webinar in a series of criminal background check related webinars. This one in particular, though, happens to be a little bit different than what we've done previously. We do have a joint session this time, and we have representatives who you'll be hearing from not only the Office of Child Care, but also some of the Head Start, Office of Head Start folks, as this will be a look between those two programs and how the child care background checks, the criminal background checks are related, and point out some of the differences between those. Who you'll be hearing from today is Rachel Dema of the Office of Child Care, Samira, I apologize, Jolly from the Office of Head Start, and we also have with us, who you may be hearing from, is Kathy Gatton. She's from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. Before we do officially get started, I just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping things. We do have well over 100 folks on the line, and so therefore you will be in listen-only mode. Your phones will be muted from here centrally, but if you do have any burning questions that you would like to ask, please locate the question chat box on your screen and feel free to enter questions there. We have a tremendous amount of content to cover, so I can't promise that we will get to answer all of your questions, but we're trying to save some time at the end to hopefully address those. I think that is about it as far as housekeeping goes. I'm going to ask the organizer to, she's already shown the agenda slide. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to do a very brief recap of the Child Care and Development Fund background check requirements, here further referred to as CCDF. We're going to look at CCDF final rule and Head Start program performance standard background check requirements as a comparison. And then to try to make this as relevant and real world as possible, we've come up with a series of scenarios that sort of cross those two areas, from some questions that we've received, some situations that have come up, and we've highlighted some of the more prominent ones, and we're going to walk you through those as well. So I will warn you now that there's going to be a lot of slides that have plenty of text on them. This isn't going to be a traditional PowerPoint with a lot of pretty slides and white space and pictures. There's a lot of content, but I think you'll appreciate that later if you should take advantage of the opportunity to download this as a resource to have. Without further ado, we are going to move on to the next slide, slide 4. This hopefully looks familiar to most of you on the line, at least I know for the CCDF audience, they've seen this a number of times. This is the CCDF background check requirement highlights, or what we refer to as the one-pager. This takes all of the CCDF final rule requirements and at a high level combines them, all of the most important pieces, in a one-page document for quick reference. So on the top left, you'll see the applicability of rules, that is who these rules pertain to in the CCDF world, states, territories, and tribal lead agencies, licensed, regulated, and registered providers, licensed exempt CCDF providers, and then current and prospective staff members. And then within those providers, within that applicability section, if you drill down a little further on the bottom left, you'll then see the individuals within those organizations who the rules are applied to. So for example, anyone employed by a provider for compensation, contracted employees and self-employed, those who care for, supervise, or have unsupervised access to children in care, as well as those adults living in a family child care home. And if you're already having questions spinning in your head about where the differences come in between Head Start and CCDF, we actually have some scenarios specific to the applicability, I believe. Moving on to the section on the right, these review the overall requirements. There are 8 total. If you look at it this way, there are 2 national checks, the FBI fingerprint criminal history check, and the NCIC National Sex Offender Registry. You'll hear that referred to as NSOR as well. So those 2 national checks, as well as 3 in-state checks, the in-state criminal history check, the in-state sex offender registry check, and the in-state child abuse and neglect check, or the CAN registry, sometimes that is referred to as. There are some notes there as to when a fingerprint is required and or optional. And then off to the right, those 3 checks, you'll see again, state criminal history, sex offender registry, child abuse and neglect. Those are additional state level checks for any state where the prospective or current staff member has resided within the past 5 years. A few highlights down at the bottom there. Background checks are required prior to employment and at least every 5 years. Background checks should meet a standard 45-day or less turnaround time. Individuals may start work once the FBI or state fingerprint check is returned as satisfactory, but they must continually be supervised until a determination is made on all checks. Again, this is CCDF provider specific. We will highlight some of those differences from a Head Start perspective going forward. We just wanted to throw this slide in there as some recap again. The same goes for the next slide, slide 5. This just looks at each one of those in a little bit more detail, so I'm not going to take too much time here, save as much time as we can for the scenarios. This breaks down the 3 primary categories: national, in-state, and interstate. And then the table there shows, again, those same 8 that we just looked at a few moments ago, but it does give it a little bit more detail. You're welcome to review that on your own. I don't want to take too much time away from the webinar on that. So we're going to move on then to slide 6. Slide 6. We always feel remiss if we don't have something to say, at least specifically to call out tribal lead agencies. They do have some very slight differences. We do say here that all tribes are subject to the CCDF final rule background check requirements, but the final rule does allow tribes the flexibility to propose an alternative background check. Of course, that is subject to ACF approval. So throughout the remainder of the presentation, when you hear me say state requirement, you can assume, unless otherwise specified, that refers to state, territories, and tribes. And I know there are some areas where that is not quite going to be the case, and we'll highlight those. What you're looking at now are the effective dates for the CCDF final rule and the Head Start. As you can see, they are both September 30th of 2018. However, for tribes, they do have until September 30th, 2019. And now, For, I believe, the final slide that you'll be hearing from me on for a few moments anyway, who does the CCDF final rule apply to? And what we have tried to do here is drill down into more detail that applicability section. The comprehensive background check requirements in the CCDF final rule apply to all individuals employed by all licensed, regulated, or registered providers, including Head Start programs, under the state law. And again, this is an instance where state, I'm referring to state, territories, and tribes, and all providers eligible to deliver CCDF-funded services, including Head Start programs receiving CCDF funding. These include individuals, with the exception of those related to all children for whom care is being provided, individuals who are employed by a provider for compensation, including contract employees or self-employed individuals, or those whose activities involve the care or supervision of children or have unsupervised access to children, or any individual residing in a family child care home age 18 and over. So that was about an hour's worth of content from previous webinars, crammed into 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully as a refresher and recap for you, as a little bit of background for the content we're going to discuss here today. I am going to actually turn it over to Samira from the Office of Head Start, and she's going to discuss with you some requirement comparisons between the two programs. So take it away, Samira.
Thanks, Brad. We're going to take a few minutes to review the components of the two comprehensive background check requirements and point out where they align and where they differ. First, the sex offender registry check. For the Head Start program performance standards, the requirement is for any sex offender registry check that is available. Under the CCDF final rule, the requirement is for the state sex offender registry. So while they both do require this, there is that slight difference. Next, the National Crime Information Center's National Sex Offender Registry check, which will likely be referred to as NCIC NSOR check going forward, is a requirement that's actually only under the CCDF final rule and not under the HSPPS requirement. Then there's the state criminal history record with fingerprint check. Both require this. The only notable mention here is that under the Head Start program performance standards, this can be a state, tribe, or territory criminal history record check. Then there's the child abuse and neglect state registry check. Again, both require this. The only notable mention here is that under the Head Start program performance standards, it's only required if it's available. And last is the interstate checks on criminal history, sex offender registry, and child abuse and neglect check, which is not required under the HSPPS, but it is required under the CCDF requirement. And it's also important to note that for the CCDF final rule, all interstate checks must be performed for each additional state where the individual has resided within the 5 years of that check. Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to walk through this table that shows a few more points of comparison between additional requirements across the Head Start program performance standards and the CCDF final rule regarding criminal background checks. So you'll see the CCDF requirements listed in the right column, the Head Start program performance standards listed in the left. And before hire, you'll see that the primary difference that we wanted to highlight is that the Head Start program performance standards require a sex offender registry check, which can be any check available that is not specified the way it is under the CCDF final rule. And then the following two pre-hire requirements are essentially the same, which is a state criminal history record with fingerprint check, and then a check of the FBI criminal history record with fingerprint. The difference is under the Head Start program performance standards, that applies to tribal entities as well as state in terms of the criminal history background check with fingerprint. That is not the same under the CCDF final rule. After the individual has been hired under both the Head Start program performance standards and the CCDF final rule, all of the remaining components of the required background checks need to be completed, and that's the previous slide that Sam just walked through, if you'd like to reference that. There is a difference in terms of the timeline for completion for background checks that are required across the Head Start program performance standards and the CCDF final rule, and you'll see that here. There's a 90-day window for Head Start program performance standards and a 45-day window under CCDF, their final rule. Finally, there's a slight differentiation between the way that CCDF disqualifying crimes may be used to make employment determinations. The distinction here is that under CCDF, we added in the language in blue that you'll see there, that those determinations are made by CCDF provider. And then finally, a point of similarity, we do require that both of these full range of required background checks be completed every 5 years.
So with that, there were, in our communication with everyone who's going through this process, we have come across some challenges, and we wanted to basically point out this by no means is an exhaustive list of the challenges, obviously, that folks are facing in the area right now. But one challenge we've seen multiple times that we're going to point out is that some Head Start programs are not licensed or registered by their state and or do not receive CCDF funding, and so therefore are not required to comply with the CCDF final rule. And as a result, these Head Start programs, that many are finding that they're prohibited from using the state criminal background check system. So I know that a lot of folks in the states are trying to figure out how to work through that. The next one we've seen only a few times, but wanted to note that the FBI issued a guidance regarding the background check requirements for both the CCDF final rule and the Head Start program performance standards. And the guidance is being misinterpreted by a few states as a prohibition for the Head Start programs that are licensed or regulated under the CCDF final rule to request an NCIC NSOR check, which is not actually supposed to be the case. So while the Head Start Act does not have the authority to request an NCIC NSOR check for Head Start programs, the Head Start programs that are required to comply with the CCDF final rule should make this request under the CCDF's authority. And so on that note, we just want to point out, it is important to understand that all licensed and registered Head Start programs or those that are receiving CCDF funds are subject to the CCDF background check requirements in addition to the HSPPS background check requirements.
Thanks, Sam. We are now going to move into the scenario portion of our discussion this afternoon. And I do understand that there are a number of questions coming in, so we're going to run through our scenarios and then take time at the end to answer some select questions. We may not be able to get to all of them.
Okay, I'm going to present the scenarios, and then you'll be hearing the responses from Sam and Rachel. So the first scenario we're looking at here is regarding provisional hires for blended programs. And the scenario is, in my state, there are Head Start center-based programs that also operate wraparound services for extended hours with the support of CCDF subsidy. To hire a new staff member, do I need to complete a sex offender registry check or just a criminal record fingerprint check? Can I show that the request for the sex offender registry check has been submitted, or do I need the results to complete this hire?
Thanks, Brad. The response that we're giving to this scenario is that the provisional hire requirements in the CCDF final rule and the Head Start program performance standards require that before hiring is final, the following must be completed, and this covers both requirements under both acts, sets of regulations. So before hiring is final, the following must be completed: the state criminal history record with fingerprint, or the FBI criminal history record with fingerprint check. And then in addition, as we talked about before, the Head Start program performance standards additionally require that before hiring is final, programs also must complete the check of any available sex offender registry check. In order for the full hire to be completed and that individual have unsupervised access to children, meaning that they're fully hired, they're not under provisional hire, the following have to be completed, not merely submitted. And that listing is what we just talked about, 1 or 2 above, whichever was not completed before hire, the NCIC NSOR check, which we've referred to, the in-state sex offender registry check, the in-state child abuse and neglect state registry check, that's the CANs that we've referred to, as well as the interstate check on criminal history, the CANs, and that covers every state within which the employee to be hired has resided within the last 5 years.
Okay, moving on to scenario 2. Scenario 2 is around aligning with school districts. So in this scenario, there are several school districts, Head Start grantees in my state. Some of these operate before and after care services with the support of CCDF subsidy. Do I need to make sure these grantee programs comply with the NCIC National Sex Offender Registry requirement?
Yes, so this is an important question because individuals at Head Start will likely have already run a sex offender registry check before this point in order to have the provisional hire per the Head Start program performance standards requirement. But this is not the same thing as the NCIC NSOR check. And so the CCDF requirements apply to any programs, again, we just mentioned this, but again, receiving a CCDF funds or licensed or regulated within the state. And under the CCDF authority, staff within these programs would need to complete all the required CCDF criminal background checks. So these include the in-state criminal history check with fingerprint, the FBI criminal history check with fingerprint, the in-state sex offender registry check, the NCIC NSOR check, the in-state child abuse and neglect state registry check, and the interstate check on criminal history, sex offender registry, and child abuse and neglect registry for every state where the individual has resided within the previous 5 years.
All right, thank you, Samira. Scenario 3, this is about potential costs for background checks. So as we developed in this scenario, as we developed our planned approach for conducting background checks in our state, what are some of the costs that should be considered to conduct the CCDF final rule and HSPPS for background check requirements?
So our response is that we are aware that costs can vary from state to state depending on a number of factors, including staff resources, the volume of criminal background checks needed in the state, the use of digital fingerprint devices versus print cards, the use of outside service providers, who are assisting in completing those criminal background checks, and other potential agency applied costs. And those could be through the FBI or the state criminal justice agency. In some states, we know that there might be even additional costs for checking certain registries, as well as these additional factors that we're noting below. The availability of live scan devices versus print cards, so that would be using manual paper print cards, may not only affect the time required to complete a background check, but it could also be reflected in the costs that are being absorbed by the state. The live scan digital prints can convey almost instant response, but may have limited availability, and the devices are normally located among law enforcement and justice partners. So we are recommending that folks consider whether you can coordinate with other human services programs, such as child welfare, that also require criminal background checks, and possibly jointly consider the acquisition of a device for human service purposes. Some states require the program or provider to pay these costs. Some will pass that cost back to the individual, and some states may cover the full cost. So that's another area of variability across costs. Tribal costs may involve arrangements made with a local or state agency in order to conduct these checks. So that is another consideration. And finally, states may utilize some of their funding through the CCDF quality set-aside funds or non-direct service funds such as IT dollars as resources to support criminal background check implementation. So those are other potential sources to offset those costs within states.
Okay, moving on to scenario 4. Scenario 4 deals with consultants who have unsupervised access to children. The scenario is Early Beginning Incorporated is trying to hire a linguistics specialist to work with children, but has to rely on a part-time consultant provided by the local school district in the interim. The local school district runs their own background check and provided the program confirmation of their clearance process that the linguistics specialist has been checked and has no issues. The question is, does the program still need to conduct a full criminal background check for the specialist to have unsupervised access to children?
So yes, unless the criminal background check run by the local school district can show that they conduct their checks with every component, of the requirements found at the HSPPS section 1302.90B and or the CCDF section 98.43B. It does not matter if the local school district cleared the specialists themselves. However, if the school district can provide the appropriate documentation to confirm that they have in fact conducted and cleared all components of the requirements set by the HSPPS or CCDF final rule, any duplication of the background check is not required. So you only need to run components of the requirements that have not been run. If parts of the local school district check align with the regulations, the program only needs to obtain the confirmation of what has been completed and conduct checks for the missing components to complete the process.
All right, thank you. Moving on to scenario 5. Bridging program authority gaps between NSOR and the FBI. In this scenario, as a Head Start program receiving CCDF subsidy, we've been told by our Criminal Justice Authority in our state that we are not allowed to request an NCIC NSOR check. Can you please provide some guidance on this issue?
Yes, we can. So all Head Start programs who are receiving subsidy or are licensed and or regulated by the state need to follow the CCDF final rule. Their status as a Head Start program does not have any bearing on them running this check, the NCIC NSOR check. So this issue arose primarily from some misinterpretation around FBI CJIS guidance to state criminal justice and compact authorities, which reads in part, quote, As a check of the NCIC NSOR is not specified in the Head Start Act, a check of the NCIC NSOR is not permitted under this authority. So what this letter is in effect addressing is that no authority for this type of check is provided as part of the Head Start Act. However, because it is prohibited under the Head Start Act, has no bearing on whether it is allowable under the CCDF Act authority. So since many programs, Head Start programs, receive CCDF funds and or are meeting licensing requirements in their state and would be required to obtain this NSOR check under CCDF's final rule, this in fact answers the question that's being posed in this scenario. So the FBI letter was in fact clarifying that the NSOR check is not authorized through the Head Start Act, but it is authorized under the CCDF final rule. So we would encourage further discussion with your criminal justice partner agencies in your state to provide this important clarification regarding Head Start programs who are required to meet CCDF requirements in your state. Those are any programs receiving subsidy dollars or who are participating in your state licensure or regulation system. At the federal level, we are continuing to encourage clarity of the circumstances in our conversations with our justice partners at our level.
Okay. We've got 5 scenarios down, 2 more to go, and about 25 minutes left as far as the time check is concerned. So I'm thinking that we'll probably get through these next 2 scenarios and have some time to try and get through some of the questions that continue to come in. We'll do our best. Scenario 6, identifying resources. In my state, several Head Start programs operate with the support of CCDF subsidy. These Head Start programs and child care providers are required to conduct the same types of background checks under the CCDF final rule. We know that the initial volume of background checks needed will require dedicated staff resources for both child care and Head Start, as well as coordination with the criminal justice side. How are states working to address resource challenges associated with the increased volume of criminal background checks across their child care subsidy and Head Start programs?
So some of the promising practices by states to address the challenge of increased staffing demands based on CCDF's new criminal background check requirements include a coordinated team approach among the early childhood stakeholders, so those in Head Start and child care and other groups, to develop an effective process for conducting these checks. Also, recommend jointly meeting with your criminal justice partners to discuss the challenges and develop the governance needed to conduct these checks. The justice could also be part of the governance group. And to save time and effort, you can utilize the state contact lists developed by the Subsidy Center to provide direction to the appropriate registry and agency among your states for conducting those background checks.
All right, thank you. And for our last scenario, this is about the NCIC NSOR check and unregulated programs. I'm the director of an early childhood in our state. We have a handful of meetings to discuss the development of our state criminal background check system. After consulting with our general counsel's office, I was informed Head Start requests submitted solely under the Head Start Act, for example, from unlicensed or unregulated Head Start programs, do not have the authority to run an NCIC NSOR check, and as a result, cannot use our system. I really hate to turn away requests by programs not regulated by CCDF, so is there any way to make this work?
Yes, and that is a great question. If a state is in its planning stages and still developing their systems or is able to make system adjustments, they really should be determining how they can run the different components of the comprehensive background check individually. So This would allow programs that don't have to run every component to run only the components that apply to us. So this is really about leveraging resources across programs with different requirements. As previously mentioned, a coordinated team approach among early childhood stakeholders in the state, so across, for example, Head Start and child care, in conjunction with criminal justice partners in the state, is recommended to develop an effective process for conducting these checks.
All right, thank you. Before we start looking through some of the questions to see what responses we may be able to provide immediately on the phone that may not require some additional research, I did just want to remind everyone that for those of you who registered with your email address, we will be sending out an automated email to that address for all registrants that will send a link to the recording of this particular webinar. So you will be able to access a recording of this after. We had gotten several questions on the question board about that. So I just wanted to mention that to the folks on the phone. If you'll stand by for just one moment, we're going to skim through the questions and see if there are any that we can address right now. And we'll be back with you in just one moment. Okay, thank you for the brief silence there. We wanted to organize which questions we could get to quickly, and I'm going to let Rachel and Samira start providing some of the responses now.
Great, thanks, Brad. We have a question coming from James Woods in Illinois, and he writes, in Illinois, the DCFS, CAN's background check takes much longer than 45 days. My organization and many others experience terribly long turnaround times that affect hiring and compliance. The database is solely managed by DCFS, which is Department of Children and Family Services. How do we go around this or press them to make a faster turnaround time? And this is a issue that has arisen in a number of states and been brought to our attention. And our guidance is that while we do expect these checks to be completed in the time frame required by the final rule, which is within 45 days, lead agencies, meaning the CCDF agency, may create your own procedure in the event that one or more of the components of the background check are not completed within the 45 days. And states also have that same flexibility. So at the very least, the FBI fingerprint check or the search of the state criminal repository based on fingerprint in the state where the staff member is currently residing is required before someone begins to work. But outside of that, there is some flexibility in the state or lead agency making that determination. We recognize that this is a pervasive issue, and we're working at the federal level to think about ways to mediate it. Sam?
Yeah, so we got another question asking if the National Sex Offender Registry check trumps the state sex offender check if we only do one. So no, it does not trump it. We actually need to do, programs will need to do both if they are required to comply with both the Head Start program's performance standards as well as the CCDF final rule. So yes, you will actually have to do both. You cannot just do one. Rachel, do you want to go to the next one?
Sure. I'm going to answer a question that came in from Stacy Wright. She writes, I'd like to make sure I understand this correctly. Does the Head Start program make the determination for disqualifiers for potential employees versus the state that makes the decision for disqualifying factors for CCDF providers? Am I understanding this correctly? Is this a difference? And I think this question is raised in connection to a summary slide that we showed. So under the CCDF rule, the determination is made by the state at the state level, not the provider. And then the state tells the provider whether a particular individual who's been put forward for hire is eligible or ineligible for hire without revealing additional information about what may have disqualified that individual in terms of their criminal history.
Great. So the next question that another question that we received is, sorry, because these are not in order. Would it be the responsibility for Head Start programs grantees to conduct the sex offender registry check if the state licensing entity is not going to do the check at the initial time of hire? Yes. So for programs, this is a great question, and one that we wanted to make sure that folks understand. This may be an instance where for Head Start programs that have to comply with both the Head Start program performance standards as well as the Child Care and Development Fund final rule, that they will have to run this check more than once. And so because the standards require for before hire to run a sex offender registry check, they should do a check that is available to them. But in order to actually complete the comprehensive background check and be able to work, they will need to, again, run, if they did not, for example, use the in-state registry check, in-state sex offender registry check, they will need to do that as well as the NCIC NSOR check per the CCDF final rule. So that is a good question, and yes, you will have to do them more than once for those Head Start programs.
There is another question that's come in from Betty Ann, and I'm going to not pronounce your last name correctly, so I'm not going to try, but your question was about whether or not we have a list of names or numbers for each state for people to call and start getting background processes set up. We do have a contact list at the state level for CCDF that is on our website that has been put together with the support of our National TA Center on Subsidy. So you can go to our website and access that contact list. I can answer. Did you have another question? So we also had a question come in about how the NCIC NSOR can be accessed. And in order to access that particular registry, you need to partner with a law enforcement agency at your state level. And the FBI has provided guidance to criminal justice agencies about the need to participate in those partnerships.
We actually had a question that asked us, someone had asked us to go over slide 11 again. So why don't we do that? Because I think that is comprehensive and might actually answer some of these questions. Can we go back to slide 11?
Teresa, if you're able, right now, slide 11, thank you.
So I think
I'm not sure if slide 11.
actually slide 11, I think. Could you go over the last slide again about how Head Start and CCDF? Oh, maybe it's the slide before. Slide 10? No, I think it's the one before, to go over the requirements.
Which one are you reading?
It was, Evelyn Keating asked us to go over a slide.
Up a little bit
Oh,
further.
there it is.
CCDF, I think.
So, I think let's go over, we'll start with slide 9. I think it's 9 and 10 are the.
She said 11 on there.
I know, but that's the note. So, let's go to slide 9. Are we on slide 9? Yeah. So, going through them again, as you can see from here, we try to do a checklist to make it a little bit easier to follow, as far as the requirements go. But, the sex offender registry check for the HSPPS requirement is for any sex offender registry check that is available. And as Rachel pointed out, this must be done before hire, which is different from the child care final rule, the CCDF final rule. And then for the Child Care and Development Fund final rule, the requirement is for the state sex offender registry check specifically, and that is can be done after hire, but during the provisional hire phase. Next is the NCIC NSOR check, which is the National Crime Information Center's National Sex Offender Registry check. This requirement is only under the CCDF final rule. It is not required under the Head Start program performance standards. Again, however, it is important to note for programs that must comply with both, they will need to do this check. Then is the state criminal history record check with fingerprints, which is required by both the HSPPS and the CCDF final rule. The notable mention here is that under the Head Start program performance standards, this can be a state, tribe, or territory criminal history record check. And next is the child abuse and neglect state registry check, which both again require. The notable mention here is under the Head Start program performance standards. It's only a requirement if it is available. And last is the interstate check on criminal history, sex offender registry, and child abuse and neglect checks. This is not a requirement under the Head Start program performance standards. However, it is a CCDF final rule requirement. And additionally, all interstate checks must be performed for each additional state where the individual has resided within the last 5 years of the check. And I think going to the next slide, as I mentioned, just need to do the sex offender registry check before hire.
Can I interrupt you there for 1 second? I'm so sorry, but I wanted to get this note out to the group before we got too close to the end. We've had a number of folks ask if there was going to be a downloadable PDF version of this presentation. And I just wanted to mention that you should be seeing a handout section on your webinar, and there is a link there to download a PDF version of this presentation. I wanted to mention that before we got too close to the hour. And also, again, just to repeat, if you registered yourself for this webinar, you will be getting an automated email with a link within, I'm not sure how long it takes after the webinar ends, but there is a recording that will be available, and all registrants will get an email notice about that. So I apologize for the interruption. We'll go back on to continuing to review again, slide 10.
So as I mentioned, under the Head Start program performance standards, there is a requirement to do a sex offender registry check, whichever one is available to that program. And under both requirements are that folks need to run either the FBI criminal history record check with fingerprint, or the state criminal history record check with fingerprint. The only notable difference here is under the standards, under the Head Start program performance standards, it's state or tribal criminal history check. And then the remaining components must be completed before any unsupervised access to children. Under the CCDF final rule, you have 45 days to complete the comprehensive background check in its entirety. Under the Head Start program performance standards, you have 90 days to complete the comprehensive background check in its entirety. It is important to note that if you are a Head Start program that has to comply with both the Head Start program performance standards and the CCDF final rule, you have to comply with the 45-day requirement, not the 90-day requirement to complete everything. As Rachel mentioned, under the Head Start program performance standards, the CCDF, the Head Start program performance standards uses the CCDF disqualifying crimes to make employment determinations, and the CCDF final rule uses the CCDF disqualifying crimes to make employment determinations for CCDF providers. And last, both requirements must be completed every 5 years. I know we have less than 5 minutes left. Do we have?
We're seeing if we have time to answer one more question really quickly.
We got a question regarding home visiting only. So we are a home visiting only program, standalone, license exempt, never have unsupervised situations, don't get subsidies. Is fingerprinting still applicable? We've tried and I've been denied at the state level, all state departments. So we'll need to go to FBI, and this will take months prior to hire. So this is actually a really good question. Yes, that is a requirement. There are no exceptions. You will have to follow the Head Start program performance standards, and under them, you will need to do, as mentioned, the sex offender registry that's available, the fingerprint checks by the FBI, as well as the fingerprint checks by the state. If you are denied by the state for some reason, they shouldn't. There is a general background check requirement that can also be run. So you can, I mean, please, we can definitely circle back on that as a one-off if there's that instance, but yes, you are still required to run the fingerprint checks. So we have one quick one that we can respond to, because we only have like a little less, than 2 minutes left. When do Head Start grantees need to have the re-fingerprinting done for existing employees? If the employees have done fingerprint checks, they need to just be done within 5 years of that last fingerprint check. If you are an existing employee that has not done a fingerprint check, the Head Start program performance standards regulation goes into effect September 30th, 2018, and therefore you have 5 years from that date to complete the entire comprehensive background check requirement.
And then one last question on timelines. Do we have to begin this compliance effective immediately, or do we have until September 2018 to get into compliance? So for both the Head Start performance standards, program performance standards, and the CCDF final rule, we have a September 30th, 2018 compliance date currently, although that is pending decisions about further waivers that may be put into place. The only exception is if you are asking that from a tribal perspective, you do have until September 30th, 2019. Brad, do you want to close this out?
All right. Thank you very much. Hopefully, this has been a helpful webinar for those involved as attendees. I know it certainly has been enlightening for some of us as we've put this material together, looking across both programs. I know myself personally have had more of a CCDF final rule focus, so this has been very helpful for me as well. And we want to continue trying to enlarge our audience and involve who we need to get the messages out there regarding background checks. We are going to close the meeting now. Just again, one final reminder, registrants will receive an email with a link to the recording. Hopefully you have the opportunity to download the PDF version of this. And please be on the lookout for future announcements as we continue to identify topics and schedule future webinars around background checks. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.